In the past week, two significant formerly leftish figures decided to throw their lot in with the reigning global symbol of right populist authoritarians, Donald Trump. Now, that would be former 2024 presidential candidate RFK Jr. and former 2020 presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard. Both appeared to travel a kind of similar journey from dissident left to right wing, and so they sparked a round of online discussion about the supposed Bernie to Trump pipeline. There's a lot, of course, that this formulation leaves out. For one thing, Tulsi's most recent presidential endorsement in 2020, while Bernie was still in the race, went to Joe Biden, yet there are no think pieces on the Biden to Trump pipeline, at least none that I've seen. I can't actually find a record of who RFK Jr. supported in 2020. Someone can message me and let me know, but I know his similarly red-pilled vice presidential pick was a Mayor Pete backer. Former Never Trump resistance figure J.D. Vance is now literally Trump's VP pick. In other words, there are many ideological and ambition-driven paths between the two political parties back and forth. I could also point out that by the numbers, actually, more Hillary voters, bitter over her loss to Obama, defected to McCain in 2008 than angry Bernie bros defected to Trump in 2016. In fact, with the new coconut-pilled-inspired unity, if anything, the problem is closer to the one Matt Karp identifies, which is that too many online Bernie bros are demanding too little from Kamala Harris for their support. All of this is true, and if I was writing this monologue a few years ago, I would have penned a blistering screed filleting these shitlibs for their unending animus and bias towards the left. But the truth is, we got a few too many examples now, several of which I've been personally burned by, to totally dismiss the Bernie to Trump pipeline as a baseless mainstream media plot to discredit the left. It pains me to admit it, but the libs are not entirely wrong. There's former communist, now ardent Trump supporter Russell Brand. There's former TYT progressive host Jimmy Dore, whose politics now just seem to be centered around hating libs and being anti-COVID vax. There's, however you want to describe, Twitter ubiquitous Jackson Hinkle. I'm sure you've got your own examples that come to mind. I think the online influencer horseshoe journey is likely more common than the regular person horseshoe journey, as best I can tell by the polling data. But it'd be foolish to assume that none of these influencers' flock followed them from dissident left to Trumpian right. Probably some of you listening to me right now. In terms of the horseshoe influencers, most of them would claim that their politics haven't budged an inch. It's that, in fact, the Democratic Party left them. Just zooming in on RFK and Tulsi, these claims are pretty hard to take seriously, especially at this late date in Trumpism, when few, if any, real populist elements remain, have instead been replaced by standard boomercon attacks on imaginary communists. But a quick look at the statements of both RFK and Tulsi will leave you pretty convinced that to back Trump, they changed or abandoned their principles. I guess it's also possible that they've thoroughly confused themselves about who Donald Trump actually is and what the Republican Party actually stands for. Remember Tulsi's most memorable moment of righteous indignation at Kamala's expense during the 2020 primary? Let's just take a listen to that again.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
It's impossible to imagine Tulsi Gabbard critiquing Kamala on criminal justice or much of anything from the left at this point. And by endorsing Trump, Tulsi signing up with a man who called for the now exonerated Central Park Five to be executed, and a man who has already threatened to use the Insurrection Act to launch a military crackdown in Chicago and other American cities in response to crime as part of this current presidential bid. With regard to RFK Jr., just a few months ago, he was absolutely ripping Trump on a wide variety of fronts, including Trump's militarism and corporatism. Quote, "If you think a second Trump term would be any different, you are engaging in wishful thinking." Well, now RFK Jr. has flipped from blasting Trump for turning his foreign policy over to the worst warmongers and neocons to absurdly claiming that Trump is anti-war. He also claimed that Trump would combat censorship, and wild, insanely dishonest claim that Kyle did a fantastic job of debunking. In reality, of course, Trump, among other things, wants to punish flag burning with a year in jail, sued CNN for $475 million for calling election denialism the big lie, sued Bill Maher over a joke, supports opening up the libel laws, called for jailing journalists who reported on the SCOTUS abortion ruling, wants to deport pro-Palestine protesters, etc., etc. You get the point. So at least for these two, the claim they're just consistently following their long-held principles, it's pretty preposterous. So what's really going on here? Everyone calls everyone a grifter these days. However, we would be naive to overlook the pull of commercial and career incentives. Since we're talking about a bunch of hyper-online influencers, algorithmic rewards and audience capture are pretty compelling, if not totally complete answers. Look, I'm in this game. I know what clicks. I can see it in our metrics every single day. If I was simply following the anti-establishment money, my politics would look a lot like Tulsi or RFK Jr. or the others. And there are few things more irresistible to the entire right-wing universe than a why I left the left narrative arc. That's why the Trump campaign has confused themselves into thinking that RFK Jr., who has a deeply negative approval rating and a rash of perplexing and horrifying stories about his past, not to mention a set of deeply unpopular ideas, and Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democrat who garnered a whopping 0.7% of the primary vote, will be powerful campaign additions. Their brains have been cooked by the stew of right-wing traditional and social media. Naomi Klein digs a layer deeper into this reward system in her terrific book, Doppelganger. In it, she details how a phenomenon in which she is constantly confused with Naomi Wolf led her to think more deeply about what she describes as the, quote, mirror world that some like Wolf have tumbled into. Now, Naomi Wolf followed that horseshoe arc from Al Gore advisor and leading feminist to Bannon war room regular and right-wing COVID-era celebrity influencer. In the book, Naomi Klein describes how during COVID, she became somewhat obsessed with the confusion between herself and this doppelganger, and especially obsessed with the journey that other Naomi had traveled. What happened? How did she justify it? One of the things that Naomi Klein found is that the mirror world or horseshoe or Bernie to Trump phenomenon, it's actually not just a US dynamic. Similar movement in Germany labels itself Querdenken, taking a stab at the pronunciation there, meaning outside the box or diagonal, and combines neo-fascists with hippie-type health obsessives. Other similar movements have sprung up throughout Europe as well. As Klein writes in her book, despite claims of post-partisanship, it is right-wing, often far-right political parties around the world that have managed to absorb the unruly passions and energy of diagonalism, folding its COVID-era grievances into pre-existing projects opposing wokeness and drumming up fears of migrant invasions, alien abductions, as well as climate lockdowns. Still, it is important for these movements to present themselves as and to believe themselves to be ruptures with politics as usual, to claim to be something new beyond traditional left-right polls, which is why having a few prominent self-identified progressives and or liberals involved is so critical. In other words, these movements need former Democrats, so they'll scoop up a discredited Naomi Wolf or a failed and scorned presidential candidate or two and embrace them. They'll download their podcast, they'll push them to stardom. They'll replace the scorn and derision of liberals with the praise and adoration of the right. That's an intoxicating brew for anyone, but may prove completely irresistible depending on a set of life experiences and personality traits. As Naomi Klein writes, quote, I could offer a kind of equation for leftists and liberals crossing over to the neo-fascist and authoritarian right that goes something like narcissism times grandiosity plus social media addiction plus midlife crisis divided by public shaming equals right-wing meltdown. She was joking, but it does ring a little bit true. I want to dwell on that public shaming piece, though, because I think it's important. It gives me an excuse to get back on the more comfortable ground of criticizing liberals. Since the Clinton era, the entire Democratic Party establishment has been dedicated to a project of punching left, deriding anyone who questions the narrow confines of their cramped worldview as a villain. And this project of derision and excommunication got turned up to 11 during the Bernie era. We weren't just people who wanted healthcare, we were toxic Bernie bros, hell-bent on electing Donald Trump or turning the country over to Vladimir Putin or whatever. At every opportunity, Democratic Party elites trashed us personally, mocked our priorities, undermined our candidates to the point of outright rigging. It's not an excuse for people to abandon their principles to throw in with Trump, but it is highly predictable that this process of scorn and shaming will in fact lead to some folks embracing the side that is there waiting with open arms to praise and uplift them and their conversion story. Not to mention, to validate their online battle-hardened worldview that liberals were always and forever the root of all evil. On the contrary, in the new Kamala Harris era, it has taken remarkably little extension of the tiniest bit of goodwill to get many disaffected Bernie-type young people and not so young people back on board. I was personally shocked that Kamala picked Tim Walz for VP simply because he was the candidate the left wanted, and typically Democrats make a show of humiliating the left for sport. In addition, after an initially ugly response to pro-Palestinian protesters, Kamala clearly heard the feedback and adjusted her tone to be more compassionate in future interactions. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying here. These gestures are far from enough, but that's kind of my point. As the old saying goes, you'll catch a lot more flies with honey than with vinegar. Kamala is trying the tiniest bit of honey, and judging by the polls and the Democrats that are coming back home, it's actually working like a charm. This monologue, already too long, a lot more I could say about the appeal of conspiracy in a topsy-turvy world, about the particular characters who are involved here, about how Trump and then COVID just really broke a lot of people's brains. But I'm just gonna end with this. The COVID era is over. The Bernie versus Hillary era, I think it's actually over. And so while there may still be various pipelines to the right wing, Tulsi and RFK, they're probably more emblematic of the last gasps of some phenomenon than a new wave of some phenomenon, as evidenced by the fact that anyone excited about their embrace of Trump was really already supporting Trump. We'll have to await what strange new political phenomenon our AI algorithmic overlords are going to cook up next. All right, Saagar, there was a lot there. But anyway, Bernie to Trump pipeline, is it real?
Yes, to the extent that Bernie is like Trump in his 2016 campaign was a catch-all for a lot of different stuff. So some people were there for Medicare for all. Some people were there because they fucking hated Hillary Clinton. And some people were there because they hate the left, right? The establishment left. And so today, if you hate the establishment left.
Because they hate liberals.
Because they hate liberals. Who should you should support Trump. Like if that's your number one thing, you hate.
If your whole politics is just, I hate liberals.
I mean, a lot of people think that.
A lot of people,
listen,
that is their politics.
I don't blame them. And yeah, especially online, like in particular, then that pipeline makes a lot of sense. Trump was a much more marginal figure in 2016. Bernie obviously was a catch-all of the Democratic Party. These were traditionally people who came up hating the Bush Republican Party. It wasn't exactly clear yet that was going to be demolished. It would make a lot of sense to back a Bernie Sanders. It also would make a lot of sense then to back a Donald Trump in 2024. And that's the thing. Look, a lot of people don't vote on policy. A lot of people are oriented towards hating the left. So if you hate the left, yeah, you should vote for Trump. I mean, honestly. And that's why I actually think the Tulsi and RFK phenomenon does entirely make sense to me, because I never thought any of it really was about criminal justice reform or any of that stuff. A lot of it really was just about the establishment being anti-establishment, sticking it to the man, and like in a realm where Bernie has now endorsed Trump, where like, you know, AOC is on the DNC stage. A lot of it does make sense for the figures who are most attracted to them. Again, not for policy reasons, but for standing up to the establishment left, to liberals.
For vibes.
Then, yeah, for vibes. Then it entirely tracks that you should vote for Donald Trump and to support them. So yeah, I mean, this is like former Trump supporters. I'm trying to think about this. You know, we make a lot of the phenomenon of like former McCain people who are now Democrats. Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, how is that possible? I'm like, no, it's entirely, like, it totally makes sense. If you support
you might call it
warmongering,
like the McCain to Harris pipeline.
Yeah, there's so many of those people. Stuart Stevens, the Lincoln Project, and all that is entirely tracks to me.
But part of it is, number one, with a lot of those people, part of what drives it is also an ambition rewards calculus. Because in the same way, you know, you're feted if you do the why I left the left thing, and you're popular and you have a podcast that's in the top whatever, and you're getting your presidential endorsement matters. Like if Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Kamala Harris, no one would give a shit. Yeah. You know, but that she endorsed Trump, he brings her up and states a big face. She's on the transition team. She's a hero, et cetera, et cetera. There's a similar, like, former Republican to resistance figure. That's also very profitable, and that, you know, absolves you of all of your past sins of, you know, supporting the Iraq War and justifying it and all of that as well. And so that's certainly a part of it, which is, I think, part of why, you know, in the same way that it's not exactly the same, because the Never Trump phenomenon is, we're talking about elite media predominantly, and here we're talking about like online media predominantly. But I do think it is more of a top level influencer phenomenon because of the specific rewards and incentives that are involved in those structures than it is a broader phenomenon. I think it's, if you just look at the numbers, far more former Bernie supporters have traveled the path to be like AOC, Nancy Pelosi,
Yes,
coconut
that's true.
pills.
I agree with that.
Far more.
Yes.
Than are like, yes, with RFK Jr. joining Trump and Tulsi Gabbard joining Trump. Now, that's not to say those people don't exist, but, you know, I do go back to like, part of why I was reluctant to delve into this is because I do think the phenomena is vastly overstated by, you know, people who have an ideological axe to grind against the left and have always hated Bernie and Bernie supporters, whatever. And I think ignores for example, that Tulsi endorsed Biden last time around, you know, and that many other figures have moved to the right who were not Bernie people. But
there's a quote going around that Tulsi actually said to us in 2019.
Oh, really?
Something about Donald Trump. Yeah, I see it all the time.
Oh, what was it?
Let me find it. It only takes a...
Well, while you're looking that up, I'll also tell people the New York Times actually quoted the last interview that you did, because I was out, I don't remember where I was on vacation or something, with RFK Jr. It was apparently the last time he criticized Trump was on our show with you in that interview, and he said he was a, quote, terrible president.
Here.
Look, that wasn't very long ago, guys.
2019. Look, there is no question in my mind Donald Trump is unfit to serve as president, commander of chiefs. I've said this over and over again. Gabbard told host Krystal and Saagar. So that was, I mean, it was 2019. So a lot of things have changed. But again, if you look at the reward system and the same thing that we think about of Nicole Wallace, of the Bill Kristol pipeline, completely applies the other way around. For voting block, and the same way, the voting blocks also does not follow elite opinion or that type of opinion. Most people who supported McCain support Trump. Now, did he lose some people on the margins? Yeah, but vast majority of Republicans are still Republicans. Vast majority of Bernie people are mostly still Democrats. So if you look at the voters, it's different. There's another thing too, where look, you know, since we're being honest about the open online phenomenon, sometimes, you know, if you want to keep your channel growing, by definition, you have to bring more people in. And so if you see a drop in left, whatever, then what do? You kind of chase whatever continues, and then you lean into a little bit of that. Anybody is guilty of it. You know, obviously, like you said, it'd be very easy to actually to grow the channel even more, to just post about certain subjects. It doesn't take a genius to figure all of that. We resist quite a bit of it here.
And we can, because we have insight that you can see so clearly which channels are just riding the algorithm.
Right, yeah, it's out. Now, in general, though, the caution is you're probably going to get burned. You know, in the long run, the people who do that, you get burned, and you almost never make it in the long run.
Because it becomes clear to the audience as well. And you're just become predictable, too. You know, it's like, if you're just always riding the wave of whatever is the popular online thing, then eventually, it's going to become unsustainable. People are going to get bored with it. They're going to move on. Whatever. So it is a short-term strategy that can be very successful. Long-term strategy, not.
I don't think it works, but you know, there's a decent amount of money to be made in the short term. That's usually the analysis that all those people have. We're already running late, so we can cut it here. Everybody have a good Labor Day weekend. Krystal, you'll have analysis on the Kamala interview.
I'm gonna react to the interview. Saagar's gonna be out, so it's not that I'm kicking him out from responding to, you know, Comrade Harris.
I'm flying to London. Everybody leave me alone. Okay.
But so I'll react to that. We are going to be off on Monday.
That's right.
So we'll see you back here on Tuesday.
See you Tuesday. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.